my lovelies, today I'm going to be talking to you about the books I read in May, and May was a fantastic reading month for me. It was the month that my lectures finished, so I had so much more time to do some reading for myself, no more university reading. I did have deadlines though, so I wasn't reading all the time, kind of like I am now, although it's got to June, but still, I read 7 books, which is going to be a record for me in a month, definitely for this year anyway. So buckle up your seatbelts because this might end up being quite a long video. Now the first book I finished was Gretas Saga by an unknown author, as it is another one of the Icelandic sagas. I haven't got it with me because I sent all my university books home with my family when my deadlines finished. This was another one of the books I read for my Old Norse literature module, and it's probably the most well known of the Icelandic sagas, and I have to admit I think it was probably my favourite that I've read so far. It is about Grettir, who is an outlaw, and his life as an outlaw as he battles against just bad luck, monsters, and feuds because of his outlawry. The reason I love this book out of all the Old Norse sagas that I've read for this course is because it's the one that most includes the dead and like magic and monsters in it. So I definitely recommend this one if you want to dive into some sagas as a place to start, and because it doesn't have like the dry bits of the old thing, which is the court that Njál Saga had. So you get more of the adventure in this one than you did with Njál Saga, which we got more of the politics of medieval Iceland. I would also recommend this to people interested in Old Norse literature and old Icelandic sagas because it is the most reminiscent of what I was expecting a Norse saga or Norse story to be, which is fighting off monsters, feuding with other medieval figures, and a good mix of skaldic poetry mixed into it as well, so it's just an all-round good encompassment of what Old Norse literature is, so it's definitely a brilliant place to start. Gretas Saga almost has like a sentimental value to me anyway, because we did the Christmas Hauntings extract, which is one of the chapters in Gretas Saga, in our first year as part of like a bundle of different monster stories. So we had the Gretas Saga Christmas Haunting extract, along with Bishkavet, which is about a werewolf, which I went back to when we did the Layers of My Defence in my medieval module and wrote an essay on werewolves for it, and then a William of Nuba text that involved zombies and the undead. So I had written on this text before and I wrote about vampires for this extract, so I know I was going to love it, and I loved that I got to go back to read the whole thing and got to read more about more monsters that are in it. So it was just really nice to be able to come back to the text even if I couldn't write on it. It's also a really interesting text because Grettir is not your typical hero. In fact, he's more of like an anti-hero, I guess, because he's an outlaw, but the text is set up for us to be rooting for him, even though he doesn't necessarily always do the good thing, more the brutal thing. But it's such an interesting dynamic, especially having such a masculine figure that is actually scared of the dark because of the Christmas Hauntings. And you've got the normal limitations such as having to keep track of people's names, because there's a lot of names, a lot of genealogies, a lot of places, so a lot of build up before you get to monsters. But other than that, I really enjoyed it, so I've given it 3.5 stars, and I think it is a wonderful text I think I'm going to keep going back to be honest. The second book I finished in May was The Secret in Vault 13 by David Solomons, which is a Doctor Who book, and this one's slightly unusual because it's aimed more towards a younger audience, and normally the Doctor Who books are definitely science fiction and put in the science fiction section, so aim more towards an adult audience. But this book was like a complete indulgence read for me, just something that I could get into to de-stress from university life and just enjoy a small adventure with my favourite characters. It follows the story of the current Doctor, which is the 13th Doctor played by Jodie Whittaker, and her companions Yaz, Ryan and Graham, as the Doctor is summoned to save the galaxy, and to do so she must break into a galactic seed vault from which nobody has returned. This book is written in a way which means you don't actually have to have ever watched an episode of Doctor Who to understand what's going on, although there are plenty of references in it for obsessed fans like me, and therefore I can place this as happening after the events of season 11. The characters are all written in the way they appear in the show, which makes it so easy to read their part because I can hear it in their voices in my head as well. The story moves quickly from scene to scene, so you get to experience a lot of mini adventures within the main adventure. I would have liked them to have lingered a bit more on each like mini scene that there was within the story, but then I get that it's written for younger audiences with maybe a shorter attention span, so you've got to be quick between the different things that are going on so you don't lose their interest. But overall, I just really enjoyed this book, and one thing that really makes this cool is that there's TARDISes on it. So when you flick the pages, the TARDIS materialises and dematerialises which is also really cool. And I also really like the chapter names of this, because each one's got a different chapter name, and there's some really cool and stupid ones. Great one is Gardeners of the Galaxy, which is a reference to Guardians of the Galaxy, and then Breaking Bad, a reference to Breaking Bad. So I'm not actually quite sure whether the younger audience would get these references, but I really appreciated them. Overall, I gave this 4 stars because even though I know it doesn't have that much depth, being like a children's story, but I just love Doctor Who so much, and I found this story to be so much fun and a complete indulgence read for me, so 4-star read. The next book I finished in May, and you knew it was coming if you watched my summer term TBR video, and that is Empire of Suns by Sarah J Maas. And oh my god, I love this book, as I do with every single Sarah J Maas book. This is going to be so hard to summarise because we're 5 books deep into the story now, and the world is just so massive, and we thought that the tournament in the first book was going to be its own storyline, but then the world got bigger and wider, and now the world is much bigger than the bigger story that we thought we were reading, because it's now on the level of the actual gods. So this book is setting up for the big war, which is going to be in the final book, Kingdom of Ash. There are only 2 books after this, The Tower of Dawn, which is Charles' story, because he's not in this book, so it's going to be along the same time span of this. And then we've got Kingdom of Ash, which is the final ever book in the series. So we're setting up for the big war at this point between like Aelin and her allies and the Dark King. I really enjoyed this book. It tore my heart out, and I've never flown through a chunky book so quick. I got through it in a week. It is a 700-page book, and I had to revise for my exam while doing this. I think I finished it the night before my exam. The character development in this book was everything. It's like, I loved the relationship between Lorcan and Elide, and then in return Elide and the witches was one of my favourite parts. The witches are one of my favourite parts in this series altogether. They add such another level and more depth to the story that I didn't think was possible. God, I shouldn't review Maas books because I'm too passionate about them and love them too much to actually get a coherent sentence out. But I don't know, the enemy in this book is now grown so powerful that it's honestly a little bit unsettling, and none of my beloved characters feel safe anymore. This book very much takes you out of the settings that we've known and loved throughout the other 4 books and slams you into the chaos of like a battlefield that we've been building up for over 5 books now. It's just mind-blowing how much planning has gone into these books, how many details right on way back with the novellas, because people like Rolf from the novellas are coming back to play massive roles in the books now. So the details that's been set up throughout all the books is mind-blowing and incredible, and I just can't believe the amount of pre-planning that has gone into making this story work. And also, speaking of pre-planning, Aelin does a lot of pre-planning, which means the ending was devastating and tore my heart out, and I've never read an ending that destroyed me so much. It was absolutely devastating. It was honestly so brutal. Think of Avengers Infinity Wars, but with books. This is what the ending of this book was, building up for Avengers Endgame, which will be the Kingdom of Ash book. So it was honestly brutal, and Maas knows how to reopen old wounds. She knows how to bring back old characters that we either loved or we hated. She's worked it all through so well, and this is definitely a 5-star read. I can see why some people don't think this is the best in the series, because it is building up a lot, kind of like the Deathly Hallows Part 1 of the Harry Potter movies does. But I honestly loved it so much, and I'm loving the characters that we're getting to know more, and I can't explain it. I love it, and I cried, and I was in pain by the end of this book. The next book I finished in May was Inventing the Victorians by Matthew Sweet, and this was lent to me by my good friend Zara, who knows that I love the Victorians. But this book rewrites everything you think you know about the Victorians. Every stereotype and Victorian image, he actually shows you that Victorians were so much more than that. That they were not these uptight, stereotypical people, that they invented stuff like hardcore pornography, and that they were involved in scandals and serial killers. And it delves into this so well that it just completely rewrote what I thought I knew about the Victorians. But the chapters were set up by themes and read like very casual essays, so obviously I prefer some chapters more than others. I really liked the serial killer chapter, I really liked the pornography chapter, the freak show chapter, and other ones that took me by surprise, like the childhood innocence one, was a really interesting aspect of Victorian society that's a lot darker than you think it would be. And also the advertising chapter, I did not think a chapter on advertising, of all things, was going to be so interesting because parts of the language really date it as being published in 2001. There are examples that the author uses that really like pinpoint it. Yeah, this was 2001, this is the early 2000s, we wouldn't use these references today. And also I think the author interjects his own opinions into it just a little bit too much of my own liking. But I also really enjoyed this and gave it a 3.5 stars? 3 to 3.5 stars. So I would definitely recommend this to anyone with any interest in the Victorians. The next book I read was another one of my summer term TBR reads, and that's Toward the Boys I Loved Before by Jenny Han. Now this is about a character called Lara June who, when she wants to get over a crush, she writes them a love letter and seals them in her hat box, never intending for these love letters to get out, but of course they do, to all the 5 boys that she's written these love letters to across her 16 years of having crushes. I was not expecting to like this book as much as I did. I was really conflicted about whether to give this 4 stars or 5 stars because on one hand it's not groundbreaking tropes, they're not new things to be writing out, it's very YA romancy. But on the other hand, I really enjoyed it because I wasn't thinking critically about it when I was reading it. I was just giving in to loving the romance cliches, and I think if you go into it knowing that you want to just be cliche and read a little bit of romance, that there's no point being critical about a book such as this. So in the end I gave it 5 stars. I could not deny that I was completely obsessed with this book while I was reading it, even matching my outfit to the second day when I was reading this book to something that I think Lara Jean would like to wear. I really like the character of Lara Jean. I relate to the always fantasizing about romance but never been in a relationship and doesn't really want to act upon real life love, more likes the idea of it more. And I also really like that she's very feminine, that she loves pink and vintage and pretty things, but it's not shown as a weakness, and it really just spoke to me quite a bit. It had good Korean American representation and also single father representation, and I just binge read it. I just gave in to the escapism of the romance, wasn't too critical about it, and really enjoyed it towards the end and started binging it. It was such an open ending that I knew I had to go get the sequels, and I actually tried to get the sequels in the York City Library first, but they weren't there, so I broke my book buying ban to buy both the sequels. That's how much I couldn't get this book out of my mind. So I 5-starred it in the end, even though it is full of cliches, and when you look at it critically it's not the best or most developed and the characters aren't too in-depth, but as escapism I loved it. While I was waiting to be able to see whether the To All the Boys I Loved Before sequels were in the York Library, I decided to pick up The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo while I was waiting because I knew it's going to be a short read. This is a book told entirely through poetry of Ziamara, who is always written poetry but doesn't come to light until the Poetry Slam Club that her school starts up, whilst having to deal with the very strict Dominican Christian parents. That's the thing that took me by surprise with this book, was the culture shock of the strictness of the Dominican Christian parents, because the blurb made it seem like the Poetry Slam Club was going to be the main aspect of the narrative, but it didn't come into play until the end, so it was a massive culture shock. So although the poetry flowed seamlessly, I felt simultaneously immersed and disconnected from it because I could not relate at all, but it's also a nice look into other people's cultures. And when I say strict, I mean strict in the sense that a tampon is sinful and her first kiss is ultimately the biggest plot point ever because of the strictness of her mother. I really did at times feel like I was suffocating with Ziamara in the book, and I would have liked to have more of a resolution to this. I feel like the ending just sort of rushed into trying to resolve Ziamara's conflict and her poetry and her first love. And also, if a mother reacts so badly to her kissing a boy, then her brother's gay relationship is not going to go down well, and that is just sort of put in there and never explored. Like, that could have been a big plot point that we explore, but we just forget about that. We push it to the side to focus on Ziamara, mainly because it's her poetry that we're reading this through, but it could have been an extra conflict in the book, an extra plot point to use, and it's just sort of left unresolved at the end of the book. So the storyline could have been expanded, but I did tear up a bit throughout reading this book, especially when the match incident happened. And I liked the style of it. I thought it was a very powerful way of doing it, hence the sticky notes that put in it. So I think, although I would have liked to have seen more from it, and although I cannot say whether the Dominican Christianity representation is correct or not, I definitely gave it a 4-star read because it was powerful, and it's also a quick read to get through, and it takes a lot to be able to write a whole novel in the form of poetry. And the last book I finished a couple of minutes before midnight on the last day of May was P.S. I Still Love You by Jenny Han, which is the second book in the To All the Boys I Loved Before sequel. I still really enjoyed the cute relationships in this book, although they were, again, still cliche, and the pacing of it's starting to feel like TV episodes, the way the 3 books are paced. And after reading the 3rd book a couple of days after May finished, a couple of days into June, I started to feel like the endings are sort of the same ending in different situations for all 3 of the books. And also I didn't like the fact that sort of Josh, who played kind of a big role in the 1st book, disappeared from this book. Another character that could have been more developed was John Ambrose McLean. I love the fact that they brought him back because he was one of the letters that sent out in the 1st book which was not acted upon, which now has done in this book. But I wish that relationship could have developed more. I wish we could have had more of a choice conflict about which boys you liked more. I thought he was going to come back more in the 3rd book, but after he doesn't really in the same way, I now wish, looking back, that he didn't use more. Although I still really, really enjoyed it. I've dropped it 1 star, so down to 4 stars instead of 5 stars like the 1st book. And the reason is because some scenes could have been fleshed out more, like Peter's reaction to the letter that ends the 1st book. We could have seen more of that. We could have had more with Josh, who sort of disappears, and I think we could have had more with John Ambrose McLean, but it was still a really cute read, and I definitely think it was worth breaking my book buying ban to binge read through the series. And I did enjoy the 3rd one, but it's technically a June read, so you're not going to get to hear me talk about that yet. Thank you for watching. Like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.